Hi y'all, and welcome back to the garden. I just wanted to shoot a quick video today because typically I do a lot of videos on the weekend, but I went to Cultivate on Sunday, which was a wonderful experience. I mentioned in my last video that I would be attending. It was the first one I've been able to go to, and it happens to be right here in Columbus, Ohio, which is about an hour and a half from me or so. It was awesome. Got to meet lots of cool people who also loved plants, including representatives from Proven Winners and Monrovia, several plant growers, particularly plugs, which you know I like to plant small plants in my garden to the extent possible. These are wholesalers, of course, so you have to have a business account to be able to order from those, but it was really exciting to get to meet and see kind of this green event that happens every year right here in Ohio. So next year I would also like to go, and I learned lots of stuff like bring a backpack because the bag they provided was not enough to carry all the materials that you get from the various vendors. And my neck was certainly hurting before that was over. But when I got back, it rained all day Sunday. So when I got back, the garden was a little wet and was looking beautiful. I posted some pictures during the event on Instagram in my stories. I'll see if I can throw some of those up on the screen. Lots of interesting varieties that are going to be coming out over the next year or so, including some really interesting like seed grown varieties from Ball for like echbeckias, which are 𝗩𝗂𝗑𝗧𝗦 cross, and some other really cool things that are just different that would look really awesome, I think, in cut flower arrangements, which I've mentioned this on my channel before, but a lot of the things I plant in my garden have some interest in cutting applications. So interesting foliage maybe, or they may produce berries towards the fall or winter, or they may just have beautiful flowers that tend to lend themselves well in arrangements. And so a lot of the things that I plant just happen to fall into that category. Not everything does, of course, but I do try and focus on that. So if I want to make any arrangements in my home, which I haven't gotten around to do this year because a lot of my cut flowers that I grew from seed specifically really did crap this year, honestly. They did not do great. So next year we're going to put a bigger focus on getting that stuff going earlier maybe. And like, I think one of the struggles this spring, looking back on it, was I had to do the new plant bed on the south side over there, which is looking great, but it did take attention away very early in the spring from my seed starts. And so I think both my vegetable seeds and particularly my ornamental seeds were behind and suffered. I still haven't got a zinnia bloom from any zinnias that I planted. I had a volunteer zinnia in the vegetable garden and it just came up, and I've left it because it's beautiful. But all of the zinnias I planted, I haven't got a bloom yet, and we're approaching the end of July. So I'm going to walk you around the garden and show you a couple things and some decisions I've made since the last video about where I'm going to stick some of the plants that I may be getting this fall and the ones I already have. And so I've already mentioned that I'm probably going to be putting the Nandinas, the red ones, along the staircase here, and moving those 𝗩𝗑𝗧𝗦s. Those were in the last couple of videos. We'll talk a little bit more about some of those things in a minute, but I wanted to show you this Ruby Moon hyacinth bean vine, which I have never grown before, and it is like magnificent right now. So this is what it looks like. You can see it here. It's almost, some of these petals are so lightly colored, they're almost blue in real life. I don't know if it portrays well on the camera. Yesterday particularly, they were really beautiful. I think I had some comments when I mentioned I was going to be growing this to be very cautious because it can kind of take over. It's the end of July here. It's planted directly in the ground, but it's not around drip, so it had a very, very slow start. And this is as big as it's gotten. I've kind of pulled it along the fence line here. And as pretty as this thing is, if it continues throughout the summer and doesn't get like too aggressive or crazy, I'm going to be growing this and probably putting it along the fence line every year because it's really beautiful. The cosmos themselves are also really out of control. I need to come back and cut some of these back because like this is one cosmo, and I've never really grown cosmo from seed. but it's like covering some of this other stuff. So I need to come through and try and probably cut some of this stuff out. So I don't know how I feel about cosmos. They're really pretty. The flowers are kind of small, but I also struggle with like something that doesn't have a great structure to it flopping all over the place in my garden. Because a lot of my garden, although I'm looking for that cottage look, it's a very structured cottage look, if that makes any sense at all, which it may not. And the fact that it's just kind of covering up other plants I'm trying to get to grow so they'll eventually take up the space. I'm not loving that aspect of it. So they got way bigger than I expected them to. So for next year, those will go further back in the border, and it must just be this specific variety because I planted a different variety and they're not nearly this huge. And so next year I know that if I plant this one, put them further back in the bed so they don't compete with everything else around it. The mini clover is coming along really nicely in the vegetable garden. It's actually kind of tall. I don't know if I mentioned this in another video, but you're actually supposed to come through and cut it, I believe, to keep it at a certain height. But I kind of really like it. It's really cushiony on the feet, so if I wanted to walk in here barefooted, I could. And it's doing a really good job of suppressing weeds so far. We do have some stuff in here I need to come throw out, but it's just spreading and proliferating really well. And now that we've been getting some rain, I've not been having to put water on it consistently, so it's kind of fended for itself over the past probably week or more, and it is killing it, as they would say. The dahlias are just starting to come in really well. This is like going to be a really good dahlia year, I can tell. I did pinch some of my dahlias this year, so we're getting lots of really nice long stems here. And some of these varieties are just mixed, and I'm not sure what they might be, but other ones like this one I believe is Crichton Honey. This one would also be Crichton Honey, but it's a little lighter in shade. But look at these guys. This is Small World. So when I came back from Cultivate, a lot of the dahlias had started blooming yesterday or Sunday when it was raining, and typically they'll look a little rough after a rain, but they're really exciting. Something else that started blooming on Sunday while it was raining were my perennial hibiscus, and this is �̑𝗓𝗏𝗡𝗧𝗦, and it's really beautiful. So it is just covered up in buds. You can see all of these buds here on both of them. But this is what it looks like, and I love this bloom. These blooms tend to be a little more pink depending on the weather. You can see it's kind of pink here, but if it's super hot, they tend to just go a little more white. But I love this dark foliage and these lighter blooms in this bed right here. So I spoke with proven winners at Cultivate, and I think they're going to be sending me out a few more shrubs. One of the reminiscent coral roses maybe, and a hydrangea that I don't have in my garden that I can't find locally, that I actually considered purchasing online as small starts several years ago in place of the Invincibelle Ruby hedge that I put up there. But I went with Invincibelle Ruby from a company that's no longer in business because I could get the bigger plants. But one thing I'm going to be doing this fall, and maybe sooner rather than later, is cutting out some of these spruce limbs. And so this spruce has grown significantly since we moved into this house. It's continuing to creep out further and further. And it's also, as you can see here, the limbs are getting heavier and wanting to fall on the ground. So these lower ones, particularly this one right here, I'm going to be cutting out. That will open up the space where you can see through it to the other side. I'm also going to be cutting out those other limbs that are drooping over there. So it's just going to be the lowest ones. I'm not going like super high or anything, but just some of these lower ones that will open up the space. And so a few years ago, and it's actually been 3 years now, I put Pachysandra under this spruce, and it has not done anything. You can actually see starts of it in there. There's a little bit, so I don't think this space gets enough light for anything to grow really well, even though Pachysandra is a pretty shade tolerant plant. There's just maybe not enough water. There is drip there, but the spruce does suck up a lot of water. So I'm going to be removing those limbs and opening up that space. And then as we transition to this side of the bed, I think I'm going to be putting some of those Nandinas that I picked up, the lemon lime ones. in this space here. And so you can see like this limb is actually touching the ground now, can be removed. These are kind of impeding my access to water here, and I keep running into them, so I'm going to trim those back as well. And so this space will just be opened up a little more to light and also access, because it's really difficult to get under there and weed. It can be really sharp from these spruce needles to clean anything out. So that will just give me a little better access to the area and also allow some more light and air and airiness to kind of see through different parts of the garden. I may also be doing a similar thing to the blue spruce. The blue spruce also has some branches that are getting pretty low. I don't think there is many on that tree as there are on this green one that are going to be cut out, but there are some that are almost touching the ground that are drooping really low. So I'm going to limb those up. It's really important to take care of your trees, keep them appropriately pruned over the years, because some of these, as the branches do get longer, obviously they get heavier and they tend to droop. And that will keep them healthy, and also it's going to allow me to have a little more garden space where I can plant stuff in without actually having to make new beds. And so the soil in this area should be pretty good because I've added lots of mulch to it over the past couple years. And so I think planting stuff under here is going to go really well. Today I just got in the ferns from Walter's Gardens that I'm going to be planting in the garden between the emerald green arborvitae and incredible hydrangea hedge. And then I'm also going to be planting some other ferns. So those are called Lady in Red that are going to go on that side. And here they are. They're kind of bunched up. They just came out of the shipping thing about an hour ago. So I'm going to give them a couple days to kind of fluff up a little bit, get acclimated to some light. And then I'm going to go ahead and try and plant these out so they can start acclimating for fall and get some a nice root system on them. And then I have these, which are crested certh, which are just going to be poked around the front garden area, particularly like in corners here where they can grow up and soften these concrete areas along the sidewalks, in between perennials over there, and things like that that'll just make everything look a little softer. I do love ferns. It's not something that I have a lot of in my garden. I tried planting some a couple years ago and wasn't really successful at them. So I think there's a really delicate light balance you have to have, and I think they take a couple years to get settled in. So I do already have some crested cerf in my garden. They happen to be under the blue spruce under a limb that's hanging really low, and they're being hidden right now. So that's one of the reasons I want to prune up a limb on that blue spruce. But because they take a couple years to kind of get acclimated and established, I want to get those in the garden this year in places where, even though there might be a little more sun than they like, but eventually they'll be happy in that space. My garden plants that I have on the side of the house are currently being watered. It come on automatically with my irrigation timer over here I told you about, so everything's getting nice water back here. So a lot of these plants, as I mentioned, are destined for in front of this incredible hydrangea hedge. So I'll also be doing that probably over the next couple months, is coming in and removing a lot of these daylilies that have been here a couple years, but also just don't get enough light to perform well. You can see how small some of these starts are. Some of them haven't even created more starts and they're just struggling. These down here definitely do not bloom very well. The ones down to that side, you can actually see how the hedge kind of thickens up as it goes further that way. It gets better light that way. So we're going to be removing all of these and replacing them with more part shade, shade tolerant plants. Probably some, I can fudge a little more down here with some more sun type plants, but the ferns are going to go in front of these emerald greens, and then we'll dig up these daylilies and alternate some 𝗩𝗂𝗧𝗦 that I got in and some other good part shade to shade plants that will like the space much better. The daylilies are going to be going in other parts of my garden, and I'm going to be saving. I've actually marked a few of them because these were intended to be a hedge of 𝗧𝗛𝗓𝗄𝗡𝗢 Classic, which is a variety of daylily by this famous breeder, and they were beautiful. Well, I ordered them in bulk from a company online, and I was really surprised and pleasantly surprised with how well they came. But after planting them, they don't bloom typically until the next year. And the next year when I planted them, because they were ordered in bulk, I got one random set of fans that did not match 𝗧𝗛𝗓𝗄𝗡𝗢 Classic. And I've been pulling out that daylily for years since that time. Every year when I see one, I try and pull out that fan, but it shows up nearly every year. And so it's been a real headache because it really clashes, the color does, with the rest of these. The company ended up replacing that set for me, and then they sent me a set that also didn't match 𝗧𝗏𝗡 Double Classic. And so I have one that looks very similar to 𝗧𝗏𝗡, and I'll put a picture on the screen. It's really beautiful, and I've actually flagged those specifically so I can move them in a certain part in the garden, at least one fan of them. But the hedge is not a hedge of solid daylily of the same type that I had intended it to be when I installed it, and it's also just not performing well. So some of these are going to be moved to other parts of the garden, some are going to be given away, but that's going to be a project hopefully in the next month or so, just so I can get on preparing that space for fall planting, because it's here before you know it, guys. We have a month and a half until September, which is prime planting fall season before winter sets in, at least in our zone. So thank you guys for joining me, and remember, in a world full of hate, be a light. Take care.